What happens when you step into a new role as the head of thought leadership? And how do you navigate your first year in that role? Today, I speak with Tammy Ammon. She's the Senior Director of Thought Leadership at Axiom, a marketing tech firm that enables brands to use data to drive people based marketing campaigns. Tammy took the role of Senior Director for Thought Leadership about a year ago, and I'm eager to sit down with her and talk about what she thought the role would be and what she's learned in the last year. I'm Bill Sherman, and this is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Ready? Let's begin. Welcome to the show, Tammy.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Excited to be here today.
So let's start with a question of focus on thought
Sure.
leadership. I want to ask you what is at the heart of the thought leadership work that you do for Axiom?
So Axiom has a really simple mission, right? Simple vision, if you will, right? Which is we want a world where every connection between brands and people is meaningful, right? And so while that sounds really simple, right, that's really hard to achieve. And so everything that we do in thought leadership, it really lines back up to, are we helping brands achieve that mission, right? So are we helping them understand who their customers are? Are we giving them helpful advice? Are we just there for them, right? And do they trust us, right? So everything that we do goes back to, are we helping our customers with the vision of having every connection be meaningful?
Now, you started into thought leadership about a year ago, plus or minus, if I'm remembering right.
Right, June 2020, a weird time to make a change.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So, what was it that led you into the world of thought leadership? June 2020. So you started out, and what drew you to thought leadership?
Yeah, so I've been working in the marketing and advertising space for over 20 years. And I had been working on the product side. And so building products, particularly in analytics, but had started my career in storytelling and on the marketing side of things. And so there was an opportunity that came up that we were starting a thought leadership practice at Axiom. And it was really an opportunity for me to take my passion of storytelling and content creative and the way I started my career with the last 15 years or so of building products and working with clients and combining those. So that was really the opportunity that came up for us. So yeah, so that's why I made I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity and make the switch.
You said an opportunity came up in thought leadership. Was the role defined as a thought leadership role beforehand, or
Yeah. I mean, technically, yes, right? Like the role was, is head of thought leadership. However, it was, I would say, minimally defined, right? I think we knew that it meant it needed to be a little bit strategic. There was a big content component, but it certainly wasn't heavily defined, right? There was a lot of room for what does this mean? Which, causes a little anxiety and excitement going into a new role. That the
Mhm.
excitement is I have this great opportunity. The anxiety is, I don't want to get this wrong.
Maybe even we go a step back from that, right? So you see this role that's advertised as head of thought leadership, and it's not like
Sure.
you've done that role 32 times, or 20 people that you can pick up the phone and say, "Hey, how do you evaluate that you're a fit for a head of thought leadership role?
Mhm.
And what do you plan to talk about in that interview to say, yeah, I'm a logical sort of fit for this for you?"
Yeah. So one thing that I would say, like that I've learned over the last year, right? So if I
Mhm.
was going to tell myself, right, a year later, is that I think there's a lot of expectation that like this is a content job, right? And so when you come in, there's a lot of people who have projects in flux that they need help with. But what you learn over time is that it's really a strategy job. And so in my case, right, I really believe I've often said, could I have done this job 10 years ago? Probably not, right? I needed that experience in the business. I needed that experience of building products, talking to customers, understanding the trends and the marketing and ad tech space to come in and be able to help curate our thought leadership program.
And so you used a key word that I associate with the head of thought leadership, which is curate, right? And I
Mhm.
think a lot of people think that a thought leadership role is Oh, head of thought leadership, they're the one with the smart ideas, right? Talk to
Yeah.
me a little bit more about curate.
Yeah. So, I think that is true, right? I mean, I do like to joke sometimes, because we live in a virtual world that's full of meetings, right? Like I literally have thought in my job title, so I need to make sure I have time in the day to think. But thinking a lot of times means that while you can come up with ideas, what you're doing is you're looking across the business, right? So you're networking across the business because usually our companies, right, and Axiom for sure is filled with lots of smart people. And so you're trying to, what's on their mind, what are they hearing from customers, making time to read what's happening in your industry, even industry adjacent. So, I think that's what curating is about, making time to learn. And then it's really being able to find those things that you're willing to say yes to and those things you're willing to say no to. And the no part is maybe harder, but as important or more important.
So let me double click on that for a moment here. So, in terms of how you're getting that information, give me a
Mhm.
sense of a week in the life of Tammy. Is it sitting in on meetings? What are you reading? How are you pulling these insights in, and where are you going seeking information?
So there's meetings for sure, right? So we've done a couple of things. We've done a really interesting thing at Axiom that I'm really proud of that we actually call Team 11. And so we've gathered thought leaders from around the business, right, who are in all different roles and different levels of roles. And we meet with them on a monthly basis to talk about tough topics. And we really make it kind of a safe space, right? Like there's no wrong answer, there's no wrong topic. We're looking for those kind of golden nuggets, right? So that's something that we do on a monthly basis, right? Where we're bringing these folks together and we ask them to bring topics, what's on their mind, right? So it's not like, hey, here you go. So we've created that team, and I think that's a really exciting way to gather information. We're also
So
really,
I'll
oh, go
pause
ahead.
there for a second. So that's a cross-functional team where you're essentially serving as the moderator and establishing the space for people to come bring ideas and topics for discussion, but you're not pushing content. It's almost a listening function for you.
It is absolutely a listening function. And I think the other thing that's really important is it's like kind of a no fail zone. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So like if
Hmm.
an idea, we've had many conversations where like, yeah, that's interesting. And we'd all love to talk about that, but there's nothing we can actively do with it. Right. So yeah, so we've made it the safe space and it's a great place. I would say we've gotten lots of really wonderful ideas out of that. We've really gotten nuggets that have helped us dig in. Like we have some thought leadership that's coming out here very soon around customer experience, and a lot of the ideas that are coming out of that, there are nuggets of that came out of those Team 11 conversations.
And is that a monthly thing? You may have said, but how
Yeah, it's a
often?
monthly thing.
Okay. Okay.
It's a
Cool.
monthly thing, but we're also big Slack channel users as well.
Okay.
So we have a Slack channel group. And so we try to keep the conversation going. If people find interesting articles or interesting nuggets, then we have them drop those in the Slack channel as well.
Cool. So where else, again, in the week of the life of Tammy listening, where else are you listening and how?
Yeah, so we have a PR agency, and I think thought leadership is really closely tied with PR. And so we're getting daily feed of where we're mentioned in the press, but more importantly, what is interesting in our space that's happening in the press, stories that might be interesting to us, things where our competitors are. So we're getting that daily feed, and so that's great. That's like a easy, quick hit. I also spend time on LinkedIn as well. That's where you and I connected. I think it's important in this evolving field of thought leadership to see what others are doing. And so there's that. And then there's just really I participate in a lot of strategy discussions, right? What is our brand story going to be? What is our product story going to be? So getting to, I think, participate in as many places where you can insert yourself to listen and hear very strategic discussions about what you should be doing and why, that's really helpful. And you can't be
Eh,
afraid to ask to go, right? I mean, that's the other thing, right? I've many times asked my hand and say, hey, can I just listen in?
So to amplify what you've said, The strategic element of thought leadership is often one that's underappreciated, but it's the most important work. How are you creating value through the thought leadership? How does it tie to the business goals and objectives, whether it's a for profit or your objectives if you're not for profit? You've got to know who are you talking to and why. And so, what do
Yeah.
you want them to do?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's easy, right? It's in some ways ideas are there's tons of ideas, right? And so it's knowing the ones you want to dig in on. For us, I kind of started this conversation by talking about our vision and that one thing that's really critical to us is to be helpful. So when we view being helpful, we have to give our customers and our prospects actionable advice too, right? So it's lovely to have these big thoughts and to interpret what's happening, but what does that mean I should do? One of my favorite sayings came from a fellow Team 11 member, and she shared with me that she really viewed thought leadership as something that's going to challenge you to change the way you think or change what you do. And I think that's a great guiding principle.
Absolutely, because if it's insights that are only put into a white paper and people read it and go, oh, that was super smart, but they don't know what to do. Or maybe they don't even read it, right?
Yeah.
Or the journal article or whatever. If ideas do not get velocity, then there's really no point in the thought leadership. And so, one of the things I look at from the strategy perspective is how do you take a complicated idea back to someone and say, okay, this is big, it's messy, it's going to take a lot of work to make it happen, but here's what we need to do today, right? And to
Right.
get that initial buy in. And I think a lot of thought leadership ties to that sort of getting of buy in internally and externally.
Agreed. Agreed. Right. It agreed. I think you said that well.
Thank you. So let's continue down the thread of sort of a year before and after.
Sure.
So, first few days in the role, right? Where were you spending your time and what did you think, were the most important things? So, give me that sort of snapshot of what you were working on first week.
Yeah, I think first thing was, hey, we have content all over the place. Can you help us understand what content we have and what really is thought leadership? So I think it was just an effort of trying to put your arms around the content that gets created all over the place.
So,
And
was it like a scavenger hunt in some ways of the what is
sure, yeah.
where?
Yeah, it was. And it was also trying to figure out like what's important to know about that content, right? Is it owned content? Is it earned content? What story are we telling? What level of story are we telling, right? And so really trying to map that out. And then the other thing was, hey, we already have these huge projects in flight. We have a very active lead gen program. And so it was like, we have these projects in flight and we need help, right? And these are our stories at the highest level. Can you help us? So that was
Mhm.
really the first couple of weeks was just, as you said, I like that, doing doing a thought leadership scavenger hunt, trying to find out what you had, and then where working on active projects, it was a bit like, trying to change the tires while you're going down the road, but it's what has to be done.
If you are enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about the podcast, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all major platforms, as well as at leveragingthoughtleadership.com. There's often in thought leadership the file problem, right? Where it's on a shared drive somewhere and
Hmm.
somebody had a project that they were working on with a good idea, but it never saw the light of day within the organization, let alone out to a target audience, right?
Right.
And the fun of it is when you start having those conversations, then people go, "Oh, I was working on this 2 years ago. You might be interested." And then all of a
Right.
sudden, these inbound flood of interesting stuff. It's like, "Oh, you got that 80% done. We could do
Yeah.
something with that."
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of great nuggets, especially with a company like Axiom. Our average associate tenure is 13 years.
Hmm.
So we've got a lot of people who have a lot of great nuggets that are hidden away. So yeah.
So let's jump forward to today, right?
Yeah.
You're a year in.
hmm
What's different? What have you learned?
Yeah. So I think, we talked a little bit about thinking it was a content job, right? And it
Hmm.
definitely is, right? I mean, that's just a critical component. But I think it very quickly evolves to a storytelling job, right? And in our case, we started saying, well, what is our brand story, right? What is the brand story we want to tell? What are the themes or the things that are going to support that and be helpful, which then really quickly evolves into a strategy, right? And
Hmm.
so, what is our strategy? So when you think about that logically, like we kind of did content, storytelling, strategy because we were in motion, right? And we had to pick up and keep running. But when you think about that, now when I think about that, like if I was going to sit down and logically approach it, you would say, what's your strategy? What's our story? Okay, let's now create our content. So I think, before where I spent a lot of time on content, and I still do spend a lot of time on content, I'm more choosy about the content that I spend time on, right? I'm very willing to farm out other content, right, that we can get taken care of. But what I realize is that upfront energy on what is the strategy, what is the story, what is important to our customers, that work is so important. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time now, really having story mining sessions with executives, right? Well, what are you seeing? It's really spending that time to figure out the strategy.
One of the things that I hear, and it sounds like I'm hearing from you as well, is you spend a lot of time moving through the organization, top to
hmm
bottom and laterally. Is that true? And do you have an
Absolutely.
example of that, or, how that works for you?
Yeah, sure. So I work a lot with some of the folks in our C-suite to really help them, with executive visibility. So executive visibility is something that is in function, right? Our public relations team is responsible for, and we have a PR agency and we all work together, right? But also there's a thought leadership component of that, right? So I will spend a lot of time, working with them on particular pieces, particularly the op-ed style pieces, right, where it's not a soundbite. It is
Hmm.
more like I really want to develop this strong point of view. One of my favorite pieces, to be honest, is I worked on with our CEO Chad Inglegow, is this piece that it's really his idea, right? It's his idea, which is be data driven or be displaced. And it's this framework for what does data driven really actually mean and how do you actually achieve it. And so we put out a piece, we put out a couple of articles on LinkedIn, we put out a longer piece for our customers, and we're looking at other things we can do with that content as well. So that's an area where an example of kind of working at the higher levels. I think working across the organization, we have industry strategists, right? We meet with the industry strategist. They're deep in the industries we serve, financial services, automotive, insurance, retail, right? And so spending time with them to understand what's on their minds, and then really like spending time with our product team. What are they building and why? Spending time with our consulting team. What are they talking to customers about? So yeah, so that's kind of, does that give you kind of a little bit of a
It
flavor of,
does. It does, right?
moving around the organization? I mean, it's funny because I never really thought of it as a networking job, but networking is a huge part. You cannot stay in your bubble to do this
Hmm.
role.
Yeah. So thought leadership, I think sometimes people think it's sort of like I went to the woods to live deliberately and, go off in the cabin and have great thoughts. But no,
Right.
it's this constant conversation, impulsive, and hearing pieces of ideas. And sometimes it's connecting and saying, oh, you should talk to this person over here. That
Yeah,
helps an
absolutely.
idea accelerate.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things I do is I keep a running document, like when I hear snippets of ideas, and I
Hmm.
make it really easy on myself, right? Which is I don't have to have this full-blown thing. If I hear a snippet of idea that I can't do anything with at the moment, I'll jot it down, who it came from, and kind of like what was, something around the idea to give it a little context. We're talking like 3 sentences maybe, and I just
Hmm.
drop it in there and I leave it. but that's a great repository for me to then kind of always be mining ideas. But it also gives you this practice of listening for ideas, right? Because,
Hmm.
it helps you kind of develop that listening skill of, oh, yeah, that's an interesting nugget. What can I do with that?
There's a bit of a journalistic piece to thought leadership where you're putting the story together. And sometimes it's storytelling, and sometimes it's investigative journalism, where
Right.
four or five people within the organization have the pieces needed to tell the story, but you've got to
Right.
put them together and figure out who has them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you do. You do. I
So,
mean, it really is. I mean, it's funny you say that, right? I mean, in college, I was in journalism school, I have a degree in English. The who, what, when, where, why, like they're just as important now as they
mhm.
were then. And so I think sometimes we like to put fancy words around things, but really that's the heart of it.
And I wanted to ask you this question. Is it what you thought it would be a year in?
It's better than what I thought it would be.
Why is that?
I think I thought it was a content job, right? And I love content and I love storytelling, but I love the strategy piece of it, right? There's so much thinking and figuring things out. And I think also too, because it's such a collaborative activity, right? Like you really do work with so many people. It's also, I think it's a place where you learn that it's okay to have an idea that falls flat. Do you know what I mean? In some ways,
Mhm.
it's almost a safe space for that because you're going through so many ideas. I have had my boss, who's our CMO, I have had him say to me, "Tammy, put the red pen down," right? And it's coming from this good place, and I'm like, "Oh my God, you're right. Like I totally just went too far with that idea, or not far enough." So I think it's content, it's strategy, it's people. It's kind of also too like I love Axiom. I've been at Axiom for 14 years, but it also makes you see the broadest aspect of your company, right? Like I've been in product management before. You're very focused in product management, right? This kind of lets you kind of see your company from a broad perspective and in some ways kind of like fall in love with what you do in your company all over again.
That's a really cool way of saying it, right? And you said something there. You've been with the organization for 14 years and you've
Hmm.
seen it from different perspectives.
Yep.
Do you feel that helped you with an understanding of the business and that helps your ability to do thought leadership? Talk to me about the connection on the business and thought leadership side.
Yeah, for sure, right? I think it's really important to spend time in the business because I will get some of my fellow marketers sometimes will come to me and say, "Hey, we're doing this product thing, but you were in that product side. What do like you were on the analytics team. What do you really think that means?" Right? And so I do think when you've spent time, building products, talking to customers, doing different, product marketing or whatever, when you've done those different tasks inside of the business, they're all really focused, right? Products is I've got to build this product. Product marketing is I've got to tell people about this product. Managing a customer is what problem are they solving and how can I help them solve it? But with thought leadership, you're kind of touching all of those things. So, it's a job that I certainly, and I may have already said this, but I don't know that I could have done 10 years ago. I think the experience in the business and the deep knowledge, especially so for those who don't know Axiom, right? Axiom is in the marketing and advertising space, right? So we help customers with their marketing and their advertising, and that is a complicated space. And so I think it's important when you're in an industry to spend time learning it because it isn't if it was just a content job, you could go hire a copywriter, right? And give them some points and they could create some beautiful content for you. But it's really taking the time to understand the business.
As we begin to wrap up, I'd
Mhm.
like to ask you what advice you would offer someone who's starting out in the role of head of thought leadership. What should they be thinking about? What would you say to past Tammy, for example?
I would first say it's a long haul, right? So this is not something where you're going to have it completely figured out in 3 months and it's going to be this well-oiled machine, right? So I think you've got to be in it for the long haul. I think you've also got to realize that it will shift and it will change, and you will try things that work, and you will try things that, that don't work, and that's okay. And for example, we spent a lot of time at the beginning doing the scavenger hunt, as you said, right? Going and getting a lot of figuring it out. But then it was like, well, how much do we need to maintain that? Or do we have, like how much effort needs to go into maintaining that list versus what's really going to move the needle? So I think it's that long, it's understanding it's the long haul, giving yourself grace that things are going to change and shift and going along for the ride. And I think too, building those networks across your organization are really, really important. It's great. And I think best if you have spent time in the business. If you have, you'll have those connections already. If you haven't, go get those connections. They're super important. And if somebody was starting out, right, if somebody was like, hey, maybe that's not my next job, right, but maybe I want to do that 5 years down the road, the other piece of advice that I would say is, in my case, I started out my career writing and doing content and I loved, and then I went into product management and technical roles. But I kept doing the writing and the storytelling because I loved it personally, right? So I had a personal blog and did lots of different things. And so I would say storytelling will always be part of thought leadership. So if you have a passion for that, just because it may not be in your current role, if you want to get to thought leadership, continuing to build your storytelling skills are a must.
I think we could talk a long time, but this seems like a good place to wrap here. Tammy, thank you for joining us today. If someone wants to connect with you or follow you, where should they find you? How do they get in touch?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Tammy Ammon. Or I have a personal website, tammyammon.com, and the last name is Ammon. So feel free to connect with me there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
If you're interested in organizational thought leadership, then I invite you to subscribe to the OrgTL newsletter. Each month, we talk about the people who create, curate, and deploy thought leadership on behalf of their organizations. Go to the website orgtl.com and choose Join Our Newsletter. I'll leave a link to the website as well as my LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing what you thought of the show.